Stop. Right now, wherever you are, I need you to think about something. How many times have you promised yourself you'd change? How many January 1sts have come and gone with that same burning motivation, that same unshakable certainty that this year would be different? And how many times have you found yourself 3 months later, right back where you started, wondering what's wrong with you? Here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're not lacking willpower or discipline or any of those things you've been beating yourself up about. You've just been using the wrong map. And no matter how hard you try, the wrong map will never get you to the right destination. What if I told you that 88% of people who set goals never achieve them? Not because they didn't try hard enough, not because they didn't want it badly enough, but because the entire concept of goal setting, as it's been taught to us, is fundamentally flawed. It's like trying to build a house by staring at a picture of a house. The picture is beautiful, inspiring even, but it won't keep you warm at night. The people who seem to effortlessly achieve everything they touch, the ones who transform their bodies, build businesses, master skills, they're not using goals. They're using something entirely different. They've discovered what I call the invisible architecture of success. And by the end of our time together, you'll have the blueprint too. This isn't just another self-help talk. This is neuroscience. This is psychology. This is the difference between people who dream about their future and people who architect it. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The dangerous lie you've been sold. Let me tell you about a story that changed everything we thought we knew about achievement. In 1981, researchers at Yale University supposedly conducted a groundbreaking study. They surveyed graduating seniors and asked one simple question. Do you have clear written goals for your future and a plan to achieve them? Only 3% said yes. Another 13% had goals but hadn't written them down. And 84% had no specific goals at all, beyond getting through graduation. 20 years later, the researchers tracked down these same graduates. The 13% who had goals were earning, on average, twice as much as the 84% who had none. But here's where it gets interesting. The 3% who had written goals were earning 10 times as much as the other 97% combined. This study has been quoted in thousands of books, shared millions of times, and used as definitive proof that goal setting is the secret to success. Business coaches built entire careers on it. Motivational speakers referenced it in packed arenas. It became gospel. There's just one problem. The study never happened. It's completely fabricated. Yale University has no record of it. The researchers don't exist. It's a myth that spread because we desperately wanted to believe that success could be that simple. But the fact that this false study spread so widely that so many intelligent people believed it without question tells us something profound about our relationship with goals. We want to believe that achievement is just a matter of writing down what we want and working toward it. We want to believe in the magic of goal setting because the alternative, that success is more complex, more nuanced, more systematic, feels overwhelming. So let me be the one to tell you what the self-help industry won't. Goals aren't just ineffective. They're actively sabotaging your progress. And I'm going to show you exactly why. First, goals create a toxic binary mindset. You either achieve them or you don't. There's no middle ground, and your brain interprets anything less than complete achievement as failure. Let's say you set a goal to save $10,000 this year. 6 months in, you've saved $4,000. That's incredible progress. But because it's not $5,000, because you're behind, your brain starts triggering failure responses. Psychologists call this the what the hell effect. It's that moment when you've eaten one cookie on your diet and your brain goes, well, I already failed today, might as well eat the whole box. One small deviation becomes permission for complete abandonment. Goals create this all or nothing thinking that makes sustainable progress nearly impossible. Second, goals make you postpone happiness until some future moment that never quite arrives. This is called arrival fallacy, the belief that reaching a specific milestone will fundamentally change how you feel about your life. But research shows something different. Achieving goals provides only a brief spike of satisfaction before you return to your baseline emotional state. Think about lottery winners. Studies show that within a year, they're no happier than they were before winning. The initial excitement fades, and they're left with the same internal experience they always had, just with different external circumstances. Goals create the same trap. You think, I'll be happy when I lose 30 pounds. Then you lose the weight, feel good for maybe 2 weeks, and realize your life is fundamentally the same. Third, and this is crucial, goals focus on outcomes you don't control. You can't actually control whether you lose exactly 30 pounds. You can't control whether you make exactly $150,000 this year. You can't control whether you get that specific promotion. Too many variables exist outside your influence: market conditions, other people's decisions, genetic factors, timing, luck. But here's what you can control: your daily actions, your habits, your systems. And when you shift your focus to what you can control, something magical happens. The outcomes start taking care of themselves. Fourth, goals ignore the power of identity. When you set a goal to read 40 books this year, you're focused on an outcome. But reading 40 books doesn't make you a reader. Becoming someone who reads every day makes you a reader. The goal is external. The change needs to be internal. Most people set goals trying to change their behavior without changing their identity. But this is backwards. Behavior that conflicts with your identity is temporary at best. If you see yourself as someone who's bad with money, you might follow a budget for a few weeks through sheer willpower. But eventually, you'll revert to spending patterns that match your identity, because identity always wins. Fifth, goals create artificial pressure that actually impairs your performance. When you're constantly measuring yourself against a specific target and deadline, you activate your body's stress response. Cortisol floods your system. This stress hormone doesn't just make you feel anxious. It literally reduces your cognitive flexibility, impairs creative thinking, and makes you more likely to quit when things get challenging. The very pressure you think is motivating you is actually making you perform worse. It's like trying to drive with the emergency brake on. You can press the gas as hard as you want, but you're fighting against your own system. Finally, Goals give you a dangerous illusion. The moment you set a goal, your brain releases dopamine. That's the feel-good chemical associated with reward and achievement. But here's the problem. You get that dopamine hit just from setting the goal, not from achieving it. This means your brain has already received the neurochemical reward before you've done any actual work. Research shows that people who talk about their goals extensively are actually less likely to achieve them. Why? Because they've already gotten the psychological payoff. They've already felt the satisfaction. The motivation to do the hard work evaporates. The most successful people I've studied understand something fundamental. Outcomes are not under your control, but systems are. You cannot guarantee that you'll lose exactly 30 pounds, make exactly $150,000, or get exactly that dream job. But you can control your eating system, your value creation system, your skill development system, and when you build the right systems, the outcomes become inevitable. Chapter 2. Why your brain fights against goals. Your brain wasn't designed for the modern world. It was designed for survival on the African savanna, where immediate threats and immediate rewards were all that mattered. And from your brain's perspective, goals are actually dangerous. Let me explain why understanding this changes everything. When you set a goal, you're essentially telling your brain, the way things are right now isn't good enough. Your brain interprets this as a threat signal. Think about it. Dissatisfaction with your current situation suggests that something is fundamentally wrong. And when your brain detects that something is wrong, it activates your threat response system. Your amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster of neurons responsible for processing fear, becomes hyperactive. Stress hormones start flooding your nervous system. This is why thinking about big goals often feels overwhelming rather than exciting. Your brain isn't being difficult. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do when it perceives danger, preparing you to fight or flee. But it gets more complicated. Your brain has a powerful mechanism designed to keep you stable, called homeostasis. Just like your body automatically regulates your temperature, your brain works tirelessly to maintain consistent patterns of behavior, thought, and emotion. When you try to make dramatic changes through goal setting, you're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming. Your brain creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension you feel when your actions don't align with your current identity. This explains the intention-action gap. You genuinely intend to change. You make plans. You feel motivated. But when it's time to act, your behavior contradicts your intentions. It's not about willpower. It's about neural wiring. Every time you've procrastinated, every time you've made excuses, every time you've given up, you've strengthened specific neural pathways. Your brain has literally built highways for those behaviors. Trying to overcome this with willpower and motivation is like trying to redirect a river with your bare hands. And here's what most people don't understand about willpower. It's not unlimited. Studies by researcher Roy Baumeister have shown that willpower depletes throughout the day like a muscle getting tired. This is why you can start your morning with perfect resolve to eat healthy, exercise, and work on your business. But by evening, you're ordering pizza and watching Netflix. You haven't failed. You've just exhausted your willpower reserves. Goals demand constant willpower because they require you to repeatedly make difficult choices. Systems bypass this limitation by making decisions automatic. Let's talk about motivation for a moment. Most people think motivation causes action, but research shows it's actually the reverse. Action creates motivation. You don't get motivated and then go to the gym. You go to the gym and then feel motivated. But goals put the cart before the horse. They require you to feel motivated before you've built any momentum. This is why January gym memberships are abandoned by March. People are trying to sustain motivation without any systems to generate it. Your brain also has something called negativity bias. It's hardwired to pay more attention to potential threats than potential opportunities. This kept our ancestors alive when predators were a daily concern. But in the modern world, it means that when you set a big goal, your brain doesn't focus on the exciting possibilities. It focuses on everything that could go wrong. This is why goal setting often increases anxiety rather than excitement. Your brain is running worst-case scenarios on repeat. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if I'm not good enough? These aren't signs of weakness. They're predictable responses to how goal setting interacts with your brain's threat detection system. There's also something called the focusing illusion, our tendency to overestimate the impact of any single factor on our overall well-being. When you set a goal to make a certain amount of money, your brain becomes convinced that achieving this goal will solve all your problems and make you permanently happy. But research consistently shows that specific achievements have far less impact on long-term satisfaction than we predict. This creates a vicious cycle. You work hard, achieve your goal, feel good briefly, then realize nothing fundamental has changed. So you set bigger goals, thinking the next achievement will finally be enough. You're chasing a neurochemical impossibility. Your brain is also terrible at predicting future motivation and circumstances. When you set a goal in a moment of high motivation, perhaps after watching an inspiring video or having a particularly good day, you're making commitments for your future self based on how you feel right now. But your future self will face different circumstances, different energy levels, different stresses, and different priorities. This is why goals feel exciting when you set them, but become burdens over time. You've essentially signed a contract for someone else to fulfill. Research reveals another troubling pattern. External goals actually reduce intrinsic motivation. When you attach external outcomes to activities you naturally enjoy, you transform pleasure into pressure. Studies show that when people receive external incentives for activities they already find rewarding, they enjoy those activities less and are more likely to quit when the incentives are removed. Understanding why your brain rejects goals isn't about giving up on improvement. It's about working with your neurology instead of against it. The most successful people have learned to bypass these psychological traps by focusing on systems rather than outcomes. They understand that lasting change happens at the identity level, not just the behavior level. They build architectures of success that don't require constant motivation or superhuman willpower. Chapter 3. The Neuroscience of Systems versus Goals. The difference between systems and goals isn't just philosophical, it's neurological. When you understand what happens in your brain when you focus on systems versus goals, you'll understand why this approach is so much more effective. Let's start with neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your life. Every time you repeat a behavior, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with that behavior. This is why habits become automatic. The neural pathway becomes so established that the behavior requires virtually no conscious thought. But here's the critical difference. Goals focus on destinations, which don't build neural pathways. Systems focus on repetition, which literally rewires your brain. When you set a goal to complete a marathon, you're not building neural pathways related to running. You're building pathways related to outcome anxiety and result measurement. But when you commit to a system of running every morning, you're building neural pathways that make running feel natural. Every single morning, you're reinforcing the neural networks that transform running from a conscious decision into an automatic behavior. Over weeks and months, running becomes part of who you are, not something you force yourself to do. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and conscious decision-making, has limited capacity. This is why willpower feels finite, because it is. When you rely on goals, you're constantly taxing this part of your brain. Should I go to the gym today? Should I skip this meal? Should I work on my project? Each decision depletes your mental resources, but systems bypass this limitation by leveraging a different part of your brain, the basal ganglia, responsible for automatic behaviors and pattern recognition. When you build systems, behaviors shift from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia. They become unconscious. You don't decide whether to brush your teeth each morning. You just do it. The same transformation happens with any behavior you systematize. The basal ganglia takes over, freeing your prefrontal cortex for more important decisions. Dopamine, your brain's motivation chemical, responds completely differently to systems versus goals. Goals create what neuroscientists call reward prediction error. Your brain releases dopamine when you anticipate achieving the goal, creating a temporary high. But then you experience a dopamine crash when you actually achieve it, or when progress stalls. This explains why achieving goals often feels anticlimactic. Your brain already used up the neurochemical reward during the anticipation phase. This is also why people experience post-achievement depression after reaching major milestones. Systems create an entirely different dopamine pattern. Instead of one large spike followed by a crash, systems generate consistent small releases of dopamine each time you complete your systematic behaviors. This creates sustainable motivation because you're getting regular neurochemical rewards for the process itself, not just the outcome. Your brain starts to crave the system, the daily run, the morning pages, the evening review, not because of what these activities might produce someday, but because the activities themselves feel rewarding. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for monitoring conflicts in your brain, becomes hyperactive when there's misalignment between your actions and your identity. When you set a goal to become financially independent, but your daily actions reflect someone living paycheck to paycheck, this creates cognitive dissonance that your brain experiences as actual psychological pain. This is why goal setting often feels stressful and why people abandon their goals. They're literally fighting against their own sense of self. Systems work differently. They gradually shift your identity at the neural level. Instead of forcing behavior change through willpower, systems create evidence that you're becoming a different type of person. Each time you complete your systematic action, you're proving to your brain that you are someone who does this thing. The anterior cingulate cortex relaxes because there's no longer conflict between your identity and your actions. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're becoming that person through accumulated evidence. Mirror neurons, the brain cells responsible for learning through observation and imitation, respond more strongly to consistent patterns than to sporadic, intense efforts. When you build systems, you're training your mirror neurons to recognize and reinforce patterns of excellence. Your brain starts seeing systematic behavior as normal and natural. This makes long-term maintenance exponentially easier. The hippocampus, responsible for memory formation, stores experiences differently based on whether they're goal-oriented or system-oriented. Goal-oriented experiences get stored as discrete events. I achieved this outcome on this date. System-oriented experiences get stored as patterns and identities. I am the type of person who does this consistently. This difference in how memories are encoded affects how you see yourself and how you approach future challenges. Stress hormones like cortisol have completely different effects depending on your approach. Goals activate your sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight response, because they create pressure and urgency. Elevated cortisol impairs memory formation, reduces creativity, and makes you more likely to revert to old patterns under stress. Systems activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest response, because they feel safe and predictable. This creates the optimal brain state for learning, growth, and sustainable behavior change. The reticular activating system, your brain's filtering mechanism, focuses on whatever you consistently pay attention to. When you focus on goals, your RAS filters for outcome-related information. You become hypersensitive to whether you're succeeding or failing. This creates emotional volatility and inconsistent motivation. When you focus on systems, your RAS filters for opportunities to execute your systems. You start noticing small chances for progress that you would have missed before. Your environment begins revealing opportunities that were always there, but invisible to a goal-focused mind. Understanding this neuroscience isn't academic. It's intensely practical. When you align your approach with how your brain actually works, everything becomes easier. You're not fighting your own neurology anymore. You're leveraging it. Chapter 4. The 4 Pillars of Unshakable Systems. Every system that creates lasting transformation rests on 4 fundamental pillars. Master these, and you can systematize any outcome you want. Miss any one of them, and your system will eventually collapse under pressure. These aren't theories. These are the principles that separate people who talk about change from people who embody it. The first pillar: identity alignment. Most people try to change their behavior without changing their identity. This is backwards. Behavior change that conflicts with identity is temporary at best. If you see yourself as someone who's naturally disorganized, you might maintain a clean workspace for a few weeks, but eventually you'll revert to patterns that align with your self-concept. The mess will creep back in Because the mess reflects who you believe you are. The system approach works by gradually shifting identity through consistent evidence. Here's how it works in practice. Instead of setting a goal to save $15,000, you build a system around becoming the type of person who values financial wisdom. Every time you choose to save money instead of spending it impulsively, you're not just moving toward a financial target. You're proving to yourself that you are someone who makes intelligent financial decisions. The behavior reinforces the identity. The identity makes the behavior feel natural. Identity alignment requires what I call micro-identities, small specific ways of seeing yourself that support your larger transformation. Instead of trying to become a completely different person overnight, you adopt identity statements that feel slightly challenging but believable. I am someone who moves my body daily. I am someone who invests in learning. I am someone who keeps promises to myself. Each systematic action becomes evidence for these micro-identities, and your brain keeps score. The second pillar, environmental design. Your environment is more powerful than your willpower. If you have to rely on self-control to execute your system is poorly designed. The most effective systems make good behavior automatic and bad behavior difficult. This isn't about perfection. It's about tilting the odds in your favor so that following your system becomes the path of least resistance. Environmental design has three components: removal, addition, and restructuring. Removal means eliminating cues that trigger unwanted behaviors. If you want to eat healthier, you remove junk food from your living space. Not because you lack willpower, but because willpower is a limited resource that should be reserved for important decisions. If you want to focus better, you remove social media apps from your phone during work hours. Addition means introducing cues that trigger desired behaviors. If you want to read more, you place books in every room where you spend time. If you want to exercise consistently, you lay out your workout clothes the night before. If you want to drink more water, you put filled water bottles in multiple locations. Restructuring means changing the context in which behaviors occur. If you want to write every morning, you restructure your morning routine to include a specific time and place dedicated to writing. If you want to improve your relationships, you restructure your schedule to include regular one-on-one time with people who matter. The key is making desired behaviors inevitable by designing an environment that supports them. When your environment is optimized, following your systems feels easier than not following them. The third pillar, systematic progression. Most people either try to change everything at once or make changes so small they don't create momentum. Systematic progression means starting with behaviors that are challenging enough to build confidence, but easy enough to maintain consistency. You build momentum through success, not through suffering. The progression should follow what I call the confidence curve. You start with actions that are 90% likely to succeed consistently. This builds confidence and establishes the neural pathways associated with your system. Once these behaviors become automatic, you increase the challenge level to behaviors that are 80% likely to succeed consistently. You continue this progression until you're operating at a level that seemed impossible when you started. Systematic progression also means designing feedback loops that provide regular information about your progress. But instead of measuring outcomes, you measure process compliance. How consistently are you executing your systematic behaviors? This keeps you focused on what you control and provides positive reinforcement for the actions that create long-term results. The fourth pillar, resilience protocols. Every system will face disruption, travel, illness, work stress, family emergencies. The difference between systems that survive and systems that collapse isn't the absence of disruption. It's the presence of protocols for handling disruption. Resilience protocols are predetermined responses to situations that typically derail progress. Minimum viable systems are the foundation of resilience protocols. These are simplified versions of your regular systems that you can execute even when circumstances are challenging. If your normal exercise system involves 60 minutes at the gym, your minimum viable system might be 10 minutes of bodyweight exercises in your hotel room. The key is maintaining some version of your systematic behavior. Even when you can't execute the full version, you preserve the identity and the neural pathways. Recovery protocols are equally important. When you inevitably miss a day or break your system, you need a predetermined plan for getting back on track. Most people treat any deviation as total failure, but resilient systems expect and account for human imperfection. The protocol is simple. When you miss one day, you immediately execute your system the next day. No guilt, no self-punishment, no starting over from scratch, just immediate re-engagement. The combination of these four pillars creates what I call systematic inevitability, a situation where positive outcomes become inevitable because the underlying systems are designed for long-term sustainability. You're no longer hoping and wishing for change. You're systematically engineering it. Chapter 5. Reverse engineering any outcome into systems. The most successful people have mastered the art of reverse engineering. They start with the outcome they want and work backwards to identify the systems that would inevitably produce that outcome. This isn't goal setting, it's systems thinking. The difference is that instead of focusing on the destination, you're designing the journey that makes the destination inevitable. Here's the systematic process for reverse engineering any outcome into actionable systems. First, identify the end state identity, not what you want to achieve, but who you need to become to naturally achieve those things. If you want to build a thriving business, don't focus on revenue targets. Focus on becoming the type of person who naturally creates value for others, solves problems systematically, and makes decisions based on long-term thinking rather than short-term gratification. The identity analysis requires brutal honesty about the gap between who you are now and who you need to become. Most people skip this step because acknowledging that gap is uncomfortable. But this discomfort is exactly why the analysis is necessary. You can't systematize changes you're not willing to acknowledge. Once you've identified the target identity, reverse engineer the daily behaviors that would be natural for someone with that identity. What would someone who effortlessly maintains excellent health do every single day? They would prioritize sleep, move their body regularly, eat foods that fuel performance, manage stress proactively. These become the components of your health system. The key is thinking in terms of systems, not isolated habits. A habit is a single behavior, going to the gym 3 times per week. A system is an integrated set of behaviors that reinforce each other. Preparing nutritious meals on Sundays, laying out workout clothes each night, tracking energy levels, scheduling recovery time, and surrounding yourself with people who support your health priorities. The system approach recognizes that sustainable change happens through reinforcement, not through willpower. Next, identify leading indicators, the daily and weekly metrics that predict long-term success. These are different from lagging indicators which measure outcomes after they've already occurred. If you want to build wealth, lagging indicators are your net worth and investment returns. Leading indicators are how much you save each month, how many hours you spend learning about financial strategy, and how many high-value relationships you're cultivating. Leading indicators are powerful because they focus your attention on inputs you control rather than outputs you can't directly control. You can't control whether the market performs well this year, but you can control whether you invest consistently. The systematic approach also requires identifying constraint factors, the elements that typically limit progress in your chosen area. Every system has bottlenecks. Ignoring these bottlenecks leads to systematic failure. If you want to build a content creation business, your constraint factor might be idea generation, production capacity, or audience building. Your system must specifically address these constraints. For most transformations, time and energy are the primary constraint factors. This is why effective systems include resource allocation protocols, predetermined decisions about how you'll invest your time and energy to support your systematic behaviors. If health is a priority, you allocate time for meal preparation, movement, and sleep. If learning is a priority, you allocate time for reading, practicing, and reflection. You also need to design accountability mechanisms that keep you connected to your system even when motivation fluctuates. External accountability works, but internal accountability is more sustainable. This means creating personal metrics that matter to you, regular review processes that help you course correct, and identity statements that connect your daily actions to your long-term vision. The reverse engineering process also includes failure analysis, systematically identifying the situations, emotions, and circumstances that typically derail progress. Instead of hoping these won't occur, you design specific protocols for handling them. If stress, eating typically sabotages your nutrition system, you create predetermined responses for high-stress situations. You stock healthy comfort foods. You develop stress management techniques. You build support systems. Environmental engineering is crucial in reverse engineering. You identify the physical and social environments that would naturally support your target behaviors, and you systematically create those environments. If you want to read more, you engineer physical environments with books easily accessible and distractions minimized. If you want to build deeper relationships, you engineer social environments that prioritize meaningful connection over superficial interaction. Finally, you design progressive complexity into your systems. You don't try to implement the full system immediately. You start with the minimum viable version that establishes the pattern. Then you systematically add complexity as foundational behaviors become automatic. This prevents the overwhelm that kills most change efforts while ensuring consistent progress toward your desired outcomes. The reverse engineering approach transforms vague desires into concrete action plans. Instead of hoping for change, you're systematically engineering it through daily behaviors that align with your target identity and naturally produce your desired outcomes. Chapter 6. Identity-based systems. Becoming who you want to be. The most powerful secret that separates people who permanently transform from those who constantly struggle is this: they don't try to change their behavior, they change their identity. And once your identity shifts, the behaviors become automatic. This isn't positive thinking or visualization. This is strategic identity engineering. It's the difference between forcing yourself to do things and becoming someone who naturally does those things. Here's what most people get wrong about identity. They think it's fixed, that you are who you are based on your past experiences, your personality, or your genetics. But identity is actually fluid. It's constructed through the stories you tell yourself about who you are, and those stories are based on evidence. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. The problem is that most people unconsciously vote for identities that don't serve them. When you repeatedly procrastinate, you're voting for the identity of being someone who struggles with follow-through. When you consistently make excuses, you're voting for the identity of being someone who avoids responsibility. When you regularly break commitments to yourself, you're voting for the identity of being someone whose word doesn't matter. These votes accumulate. Eventually, your brain accepts this as your identity. But here's the breakthrough. You can strategically engineer your identity by being intentional about the votes you cast. Every systematic behavior becomes evidence for the identity you want to develop. When you stick to your morning routine, you're voting for the identity of being someone who is disciplined and reliable. When you choose to read instead of scrolling social media, you're voting for the identity of being someone who values growth over entertainment. The identity-based approach starts with identity design, clearly defining who you need to become to naturally achieve your desired outcomes. This isn't about creating a fake version of yourself. It's about identifying the authentic version of yourself that would effortlessly maintain the behaviors that create success. If you want excellent health, you design the identity of someone who naturally prioritizes physical well-being. If you want financial freedom, you design the identity of someone who naturally makes intelligent financial decisions. But identity design must be believable. You can't go from seeing yourself as unmotivated to suddenly adopting the identity of being the most driven person alive. Your brain will reject this as incongruent with your self-concept. Instead, you develop bridge identities, slightly upgraded versions of yourself that feel challenging but achievable. If you currently see yourself as someone who struggles with consistency, your bridge identity might be someone who is becoming more reliable. If you see yourself as financially irresponsible, your bridge identity might be someone who is learning to make smarter money decisions. The key to successful identity shifting is starting with micro-identities, small, specific aspects of your larger identity that you can prove through daily actions. Instead of trying to become a completely different person, you focus on becoming someone who does one specific thing consistently. I am someone who exercises every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I am someone who reads for 20 minutes before bed. I am someone who saves 15% of every paycheck. These micro-identities feel manageable, but they create the foundation for larger identity shifts. Each time you execute a systematic behavior, you're creating behavioral evidence, proof that supports your desired identity. Your brain constantly looks for evidence to confirm its beliefs about who you are. When you consistently provide evidence for positive identities, your brain starts accepting these as true. The beautiful thing about behavioral evidence is that it's objective. You can't argue with your own actions. If you've meditated every day for 30 days, you have undeniable proof that you are someone who meditates daily. Identity-based systems also leverage identity anchors, specific phrases or statements that reinforce your desired identity during moments of decision. Instead of asking yourself whether you feel like doing something, you ask yourself what someone with your target identity would do. What would someone who values their health do in this situation? What would someone who is financially responsible do right now? What would someone committed to growth choose? These questions bypass motivation and emotion, connecting your decisions directly to your identity. The compound effect of identity-based thinking is extraordinary. When your behavior aligns with your identity, decision-making becomes effortless. You don't have to motivate yourself to exercise because you are someone who exercises. You don't have to force yourself to save money because you are someone who values financial security. The behavior flows naturally from the identity. But identity shifts require identity maintenance, regularly reinforcing your new identity through both actions and internal dialogue. This means celebrating evidence that supports your desired identity and reframing setbacks as temporary deviations rather than identity failures. If you miss a workout, you don't conclude that you're undisciplined. You remind yourself that you are someone who exercises regularly, and this was just one missed session. The identity remains intact, making it easier to get back on track. Identity-based systems also create identity protection motivation. Once you've established a positive identity, your brain becomes motivated to protect that identity. You start making decisions not just based on immediate outcomes, but based on whether those decisions align with who you believe you are. This creates a powerful internal accountability system that doesn't rely on external motivation or willpower. The most successful people understand that sustainable change happens at the identity level, not the behavior level. They don't try to force themselves to do things that conflict with their self-concept. They strategically shift their self-concept so that successful behaviors become natural expressions of who they are. This is why their success seems effortless. They're not fighting against their identity, they're leveraging it. Chapter 7. Environmental Design. Engineering success into your space. Your environment is silently shaping every decision you make. Right now, as you absorb this, your physical space is either supporting your success or sabotaging it. The most successful people understand something that average performers ignore. You don't rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of your environment. If you want to transform your life without relying on willpower, you must master environmental design. Here's the truth: the personal development industry doesn't want you to know. Willpower is not renewable. Research consistently shows that decision fatigue depletes your mental energy throughout the day. Every time you choose between a productive option and a distracting option, you're using cognitive resources that could be applied to more important decisions. Environmental design eliminates the need for these choices by making good decisions inevitable and bad decisions difficult. Environmental design operates on 3 levels: physical environment, digital environment, and social environment. Each level has enormous influence over your behavior, and most people are completely unconscious of how their environment is programming their actions. When you become intentional about designing all 3 levels, you create environmental inevitability, a situation where following your systems becomes the path of least resistance. Let's start with physical environment. Every object in your space is either a cue for positive behavior or negative behavior. If you want to read more but your book is in another room while your phone is on your nightstand, you've designed your environment to prioritize phone usage over reading. If you want to exercise but your workout clothes are buried in a closet while your comfortable loungewear is easily accessible, you've designed your environment to prioritize comfort over fitness. The principle is simple: reduce friction for behaviors you want and increase friction for behaviors you don't want. Friction is the effort required to perform an action. When you reduce friction for positive behaviors, they become more likely to happen automatically. When you increase friction for negative behaviors, they require conscious effort, making them less likely to occur. Reducing friction means making positive behaviors as easy as possible. If you want to drink more water, place filled bottles in every room. If you want to take supplements, put them next to your coffee maker. If you want to practice an instrument, leave it in a visible, accessible location. If you want to eat healthier, prepare nutritious snacks and place them at eye level in your refrigerator. The key is eliminating any barriers between intention and action. Increasing friction means making negative behaviors more difficult. If you want to reduce social media usage, delete apps from your phone and log out of accounts on your computer. If you want to eat less junk food, don't buy it or store it in hard-to-reach places. If you want to watch less television, unplug it and put the remote in another room. If you want to stop hitting snooze, place your alarm across the room. The goal isn't making these behaviors impossible. It's requiring conscious effort. Digital environment design is increasingly critical in our technology-saturated world. Your devices are programmed by brilliant engineers specifically to capture and hold your attention. If you're not intentional about your digital environment, these platforms will hijack your focus and direct it toward their priorities rather than yours. But when you design your digital environment strategically, technology becomes a tool for achieving your systems rather than a distraction from them. Digital environment design starts with audit and elimination. Go through every app on your phone and ask, does this support my systems or distract from them? Delete or restrict access to apps that consistently pull you away from your priorities. Use website blockers, app timers, and focus tools to create friction around time-wasting activities. Set up your devices so that the first thing you see when you open them supports your goals rather than distracts from them. But digital environment design isn't just about restriction. It's also about optimization. Use technology to automate positive behaviors and create reminders for systematic actions. Set up automatic transfers to savings accounts. Use tracking apps to monitor your system compliance. Create calendar blocks for important activities. Set up email filters that prioritize meaningful messages and reduce noise. Configure your devices to deliver information and opportunities that support your systems. Social environment is perhaps the most powerful and most overlooked aspect of environmental design. Entrepreneur Jim Rohn famously observed that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But the influence goes far beyond just your closest relationships. Every person you interact with regularly is either reinforcing positive behaviors or normalizing negative ones. Social environment design requires both addition and subtraction. You need to distance yourself from people who consistently engage in behaviors that conflict with your systems. And you need to seek out people who naturally engage in the behaviors you want to develop. This doesn't mean cutting off relationships, but it does mean being intentional about who you spend time with and in what contexts. If you want to build a business, spend time with entrepreneurs. If you want to get in shape, exercise with people who prioritize fitness. If you want to read more, join book clubs or discussion groups. If you want to learn new skills, connect with people who value growth and learning. When positive behaviors are normal in your social environment, they become easier to maintain because they feel natural rather than exceptional. Social environment design also means being strategic about the content you consume, the podcasts you listen to, the books you read, the videos you watch. All of these are part of your social environment because they expose you to different perspectives, values, and behaviors. Consuming content from people who embody the identity you want to develop helps normalize that identity in your mind. Environmental design also includes contextual cues, specific triggers in your environment that automatically prompt systematic behaviors. These could be visual cues like putting your workout clothes where you'll see them first thing in the morning, or temporal cues like always reading after you brush your teeth at night. The key is creating strong associations between environmental triggers and desired behaviors. The compound effect of environmental design is extraordinary. When your environment consistently supports your systems, following those systems becomes automatic. You're no longer relying on motivation or willpower to make good choices. You're leveraging environmental psychology to make good choices inevitable. This is why people who master environmental design seem to achieve their goals effortlessly. They're not using more willpower. They're using more intelligence. Chapter 8. The 30-Day System Installation Protocol. Most people fail at implementing systems because they try to change everything at once. They get excited about transformation and immediately attempt to overhaul their entire life, only to crash and burn within weeks. But the most successful people understand that sustainable change happens through systematic implementation, not dramatic overhaul. This is your step-by-step protocol for installing any system in exactly 30 days, creating lasting change without overwhelm or burnout. The 30-day time frame isn't arbitrary. Neuroscience research shows that it takes approximately 18 to 254 days to form a new habit, with an average around 66 days. But 30 days is the perfect balance, long enough to create real momentum without feeling so distant that you lose focus. Week 1 is Foundation Week. Your only goal is establishing the minimum viable version of your system. This is not the time to be ambitious or try to implement the full version of what you eventually want to achieve. If your ultimate system involves exercising for an hour every day, your minimum viable version might be 10 minutes of movement. If you want to eventually read for 2 hours daily, start with 10 pages. The reason for starting small is psychological, not practical. Your brain judges new behaviors based on how they feel, not how they look. A 10-minute walk that feels easy creates positive associations with exercise. A 60-minute workout that feels overwhelming creates negative associations that make you less likely to continue. During Foundation Week, you're not trying to get dramatic results. You're trying to prove to your brain that this new behavior is safe, manageable, and positive. Foundation Week also involves implementation triggers, specific cues that will prompt your systematic behavior. The most effective triggers are actions you already do consistently. If you want to implement a reading system, trigger it immediately after your morning coffee. If you want to implement an exercise system, trigger it immediately after you wake up. The key is choosing triggers that are already automatic. Week 2 is Consistency Week. Your focus shifts from establishing the behavior to proving you can maintain it. This is often where people encounter the first major challenge. The novelty is worn off, but the behavior hasn't become automatic yet. During Consistency Week, your only goal is executing your minimum viable system every single day, regardless of how you feel or what else is happening. Consistency Week often involves the implementation dip, a period where motivation decreases and the new behavior feels more difficult. This is completely normal and expected. Your brain is testing whether this new pattern is permanent or just temporary. Understanding that feeling less motivated during week 2 doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're right on track. To navigate Consistency Week successfully, you need predetermined responses to obstacles that typically derail progress. What will you do if you're traveling? What if you're sick? What if you're stressed or busy? Having specific protocols for these situations prevents you from using them as excuses to break your system. Week 3 is Integration Week. You begin incorporating your systematic behavior into your broader life context. This is when you start connecting your new system to your identity and long-term vision. Instead of just going through the motions, you begin seeing yourself as someone who naturally engages in this behavior. Integration Week is also when you can begin slightly increasing the complexity or duration of your system, but only if the minimum viable version has become truly automatic. The test is simple. Does executing your system require conscious effort and decision-making, or has it become as automatic as brushing your teeth? If it still requires effort, continue with the minimum viable version. If it feels automatic, you can carefully expand it. Week 4 is Optimization Week. You refine and improve your system based on what you've learned from the first 3 weeks. What aspects of the system work well? What aspects create friction or resistance? How can you modify the system to be more effective, enjoyable, or sustainable? Optimization Week is about making good systems great, not about making dramatic changes. During Optimization Week, you also begin planning for long-term sustainability. How will you maintain this system when life gets busy? How will you continue progressing without losing the foundation you've built? The key to successful implementation is progressive consistency, focusing on maintaining the behavior rather than perfecting it. Many people derail their progress by trying to optimize a system before it's even established. Throughout all 4 weeks, you must resist the temptation to implement multiple systems simultaneously. Your brain can only handle one major behavioral change at a time if you want that change to become automatic. The most successful people implement systems sequentially, not simultaneously. You also need to track process compliance, not outcomes. During the 30-day implementation period, your only metric should be whether you executed your systematic behavior, not what results that behavior produced. Did you complete your 10-minute walk? Did you read your 10 pages? Did you meditate for 5 minutes? These process metrics keep you focused on what you control. The 30-day implementation protocol also includes failure protocols, predetermined responses to missing a day or breaking your system. The most important rule is the one-day rule. If you miss one day, you must execute your system the next day, without exception. Missing one day is human. Missing 2 days in a row is the beginning of system collapse. The one-day rule prevents temporary setbacks from becoming permanent. Failures. By the end of 30 days, you'll have successfully installed a new system that feels natural, automatic, and sustainable. More importantly, you'll have proven to yourself that you can systematically implement positive changes in your life. This builds implementation confidence, the belief that you can successfully adopt any behavior that serves your long-term goals. Chapter 9. The Compound Effect. Exponential Life changes the most profound difference between people who achieve extraordinary success and those who remain average isn't talent, luck, or circumstances. It's their understanding of compound effects. While average people focus on linear improvements and immediate results, extraordinary people design systems that create exponential growth over time. Compound effects work because of a fundamental principle most people don't understand. Small improvements multiplied by consistency create exponential results. A 1% improvement every day doesn't just add up to 365% improvement over a year. Due to compounding, it actually results in being 37 times better. This isn't mathematical theory. It's the secret behind every extraordinary achievement. But here's what most people miss. Compound effects aren't automatic. They require systematic design. Random positive actions don't compound. Only systematic positive actions that build on each other create compound effects. This is why people who focus on goals often see linear progress at best, while people who focus on systems experience exponential transformation. The first principle of compound system design is understanding compound inputs versus compound outputs. Compound inputs are systematic behaviors that become more effective over time. Reading, exercising, skill development, relationship building. Each day's effort builds on previous days, making future efforts more effective. Compound outputs are results that increase exponentially rather than linearly. Wealth, influence, capability, opportunities. Most people focus entirely on compound outputs. They want exponential results. But compound outputs are only possible through compound inputs. You can't create exponential wealth without systematic investing. You can't create extraordinary influence without systematic relationship building. You can't create exceptional capabilities without systematic skill development. The second principle is understanding compound time frames. Different types of compound effects operate on different time scales. Physical fitness compounds over months. Knowledge compounds over years. Relationships compound over decades. Financial investments compound over lifetimes. Understanding these time frames prevents you from abandoning compound systems prematurely when you don't see immediate exponential results. The most powerful compound effects are often invisible during initial stages. You can read every day for months without feeling dramatically smarter. You can invest consistently for years without feeling wealthy. You can build relationships systematically without immediately having a powerful network. But people who understand compound effects know that this invisible progress is creating the foundation for exponential future returns. The third principle is compound acceleration, the recognition that compound effects don't just continue linearly, they accelerate over time. This happens because systematic behaviors create compound amplifiers, capabilities, resources, or conditions that make future systematic behaviors more effective. Learning accelerates your ability to learn faster. Physical fitness accelerates your ability to become more fit. Wealth accelerates your ability to create more wealth. Networks accelerate your ability to build bigger networks. Compound acceleration is why successful people often seem to achieve more and more with less and less effort over time. They're not working harder. They're leveraging the compound amplifiers they've built through years of systematic behavior. The fourth principle is compound integration, designing systems that create compound effects across multiple areas of life simultaneously. Instead of having isolated systems that only affect single areas, you create integrated systems that improve multiple aspects of your life at once. A morning routine that includes exercise, reading, and planning compounds your physical health, knowledge, and productivity simultaneously. Compound integration works because many systematic behaviors have multiple benefits that reinforce each other. Regular exercise doesn't just improve physical health, it also increases mental clarity, energy levels, and discipline. The most successful people deliberately design systems that maximize compound integration. They look for systematic behaviors that create benefits across multiple life areas. The fifth principle is compound protection, designing systems that protect compound effects from disruption and decay. Compound effects are powerful but fragile. Missing a few days can set back weeks of progress. Abandoning a system for a month can eliminate months of compound benefits. Compound protection involves creating redundancy and resilience in your systems so they can survive disruption without losing momentum. This includes minimum viable versions of your systems for challenging circumstances, recovery protocols for getting back on track after disruptions, and environmental design that makes systematic behaviors as automatic as possible. Compound protection also means understanding that consistency matters more than intensity for compound effects. 1 hour of reading every day for a year creates more compound benefits than reading for 8 hours once per week. Compound effects reward systematic consistency, not sporadic intensity. The ultimate goal of understanding compound effects is creating compound life design, a systematic approach to living where every major area of your life is governed by systems that create exponential improvements over time. This means your health system compounds your physical capabilities. Your learning system compounds your knowledge and skills. Your relationship system compounds your social capital. Your financial system compounds your economic resources. When you achieve compound life design, extraordinary results become inevitable. You're not trying to force dramatic changes through willpower and motivation. You're leveraging the mathematical certainty of compound effects to create exponential improvements across every area of your life. Chapter 10. Living Your System-Driven Future. You now have the complete blueprint for transforming your life through systematic thinking. But implementing these concepts is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when systematic thinking becomes your default approach to every area of life. When you reach this level, you'll never need to depend on goals, motivation, or willpower again. You'll have created a system-driven life that produces extraordinary results automatically. The first element of complete systematic transformation is systematic thinking across all life domains. Instead of having a few good habits, you approach every important area with systematic intention: health, relationships, career, finances, learning, contribution. Everything becomes governed by well-designed systems rather than random actions or sporadic motivation. This doesn't mean obsessive control over every detail. It means intentional design of the systematic behaviors that create the outcomes you want in every area that matters. You become someone who instinctively asks systematic questions. Instead of setting goals, you ask what systems would naturally produce your desired outcomes. Instead of relying on motivation, you ask how to design environments and processes that make desired behaviors automatic. The second element is systematic problem solving. When challenges arise, instead of hoping things will improve or trying to force solutions through effort, you systematically analyze the situation and design systematic responses. You become someone who solves problems permanently by changing systems rather than temporarily by working harder. If you're consistently behind on important projects, instead of just working longer hours, you systematically analyze your time allocation, priority setting, and attention management to design systems that prevent the problem from recurring. The third element is systematic growth and adaptation. You become someone who continuously evolves your systems as you grow and as circumstances change. You understand that the systems that got you to your current level may not get you to the next level, and you systematically upgrade your approaches as you develop new capabilities and face new challenges. The fourth element is systematic influence and contribution. As you master systematic thinking in your own life, you begin to influence others toward systematic approaches. You become someone who models long-term thinking and systematic execution in your family, workplace, and community. You demonstrate through your results that systematic approaches work better than motivation-based approaches. The fifth element is systematic legacy creation. You begin thinking in terms of systematic behaviors that will create value far beyond your individual lifetime. What knowledge will you systematically develop and share? What relationships will you systematically build and maintain? What assets will you systematically create for future generations? Legacy thinking doesn't require dramatic achievements. It requires systematic consistency in behaviors that compound over decades. The person who reads systematically for 40 years creates a legacy of knowledge and wisdom. The person who builds relationships systematically for decades creates a legacy of connection and influence. The ultimate transformation is psychological. You become someone who genuinely prefers systematic approaches to motivation-based approaches. You no longer see systems as constraints on spontaneity or creativity. You see them as foundations for freedom and effectiveness. You understand that systematic thinking doesn't limit your possibilities. It makes extraordinary possibilities inevitable. When you reach this level, you'll notice that most people are still trapped in the goal motivation failure cycle that you've left behind. You'll see people getting excited about dramatic changes, relying on willpower to sustain them, experiencing inevitable setbacks, and then starting the cycle over again. You'll understand why their approach doesn't work, and you'll have compassion for their struggle because you remember being trapped in the same patterns. But you'll also understand that you've discovered something profound, a way of approaching life that makes extraordinary results inevitable rather than hopeful. You'll know that whatever you decide is important, you can systematically create it. Whatever challenges you face, you can systematically solve them. Whatever level you want to reach, you can systematically build the behaviors that will get you there. This is your system-driven future. It's not a fantasy or a goal. It's the inevitable result of applying these principles consistently over time. The only question is whether you'll begin implementing these systems today or continue hoping that motivation and willpower will eventually work. The choice is yours. But now you know there's a better way. Now you know how to set systems instead of goals and create the life you've always wanted through systematic thinking and systematic action. Your transformation starts with your next systematic behavior. Choose one system, implement it using the 30-day protocol, and begin the journey toward becoming someone who achieves extraordinary results, not through heroic effort, but through systematic excellence. Your future self is waiting for you to make this choice, and your results will prove that systematic thinking is the secret that separates dreamers from achievers in every area of life. The architecture is built. The blueprint is complete. The systems are yours to install. Welcome to your system-driven life.